I realized sort of in year 5 or 6 that I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to just like climb the ladder. For a while, that was interesting. And then I was like, instead of climbing a ladder, going back to like my turning things into games, like I wanted to be a level 1 everything. I wanted to be a level 1 marketer, level 1 designer, level 1 software developer, level 1 project manager, level 1 manager. And I actually told my boss this at the time, and he was sort of like, okay. So I was like, I love that because that was a big gift for me to first like realize that's what I wanted, and then to be in a place that was so perfect for learning all these different skills, and to have a manager that was willing to sort of entertain it, and then to be paid a lot of money on top of that.
This week, I'm sharing part of an older episode with Buster Benson, who is an entrepreneur and former product leader at companies like Amazon, Twitter, Slack, and Patreon. Buster has also built and co-founded several incredible businesses like 43 Things, healthmonth.com, and currently he's the CEO of 750words.com, which is a writing tool that I've recommended to a ton of people in the past who are looking to build a writing habit online. Buster also writes on Medium, and he's the author of Why Are We Yelling? The Art of Productive Disagreement. So in this part, you're going to hear Buster and I talking mostly about his career. We talk about how he cultivated a positive mindset despite some of his early experiences. We talk about the influence of the internet in transforming your career opportunities. We talked about Buster's early journey in writing and building his career, the power of following your curiosity. We talk about how the internet is reshaping the world, and the inspiration for his book, Why Are We Yelling? So overall, I think this is a fantastic episode. You can get the full show notes, the transcript, and read my newsletter at theknowledge.io. And you can find Buster online on Twitter at Buster. And we'll have links to all his stuff in the description. So if you love this episode, please do share it with a friend. And don't forget to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, because it helps us so much to find other listeners just like you. I'm really interested. I didn't know where to start with you actually, because you are extremely, I want to say vulnerable online. I don't know if that matches your perspective, but even just looking at your website, like forget about, like Twitter and all the other spaces that you're on, just looking at your website, there's a plethora of stuff and information, and almost anything that everyone could want to know about you is there in some form. And it was weird because, okay, I knew we were going to have this conversation. I didn't want to look at too much of it. I was thinking of, I think it's David Letterman, who was like,
it's all there. You wouldn't have to have me here if you had looked at it all.
Yeah, exactly. And he just wants to be led by his curiosity and see what happens. And so I kind of wanted to do that. But simultaneously, you have this really great page. I think it's like your About Me page, which has like this graphic with all the time of your life. And that seemed really interesting to me. And so I thought maybe we could talk about, or we could start with your background and your upbringing, and then see what threads we can pull on and see where that goes.
Yeah. Well, I'm old. I'm 45. And yes, I do have a page on my website that has mapped out my entire life up to this week. For every single week in my life, there's a box. And the boxes start from, when I was born in May of 1976 to when I turned 100 years old, 2076, because I have a goal to ride a bike around the block on my 100th birthday. That's my one always present life goal, because everything else can sort of be hung from that in some ways, like my health, my relationships, my mental capacity, my stress, just get me there. I just want to have a long life that is, by the end of it, I feel like I'm still living a quality life. So that was, I think a lot about death, and I think a lot about life as a result of that. And this map, I grew up in Southern California. I was raised with a Japanese mom and a white dad, and he was in computer science. He was an engineer. And so I had a pretty standard, like upper middle class life, had good schools, did okay in school. I never wanted to get A+ or A's. I always wanted to get to A- for the maximum effort to reward ratio there.
Can I just double click on that quickly?
Sure.
How was that impacted by, was that maybe just your upbringing in terms of like how you were brought up, where you had a freedom to do that? Or was that more just an intrinsic, this is how you are and you want to impose that on the world?
I've tried to tease this apart before to understand what is, because I have a kid now. I have 2 boys, 11 and 5.
Okay.
And I'm trying to help them sort of find the same mindset that I had found early in my life around seeing things that could be a drag, like school, as games. And So I saw school as a game where my goal was to do enough to get an okay grade and then to also pursue my interests. So I was always twisting the assignments to do what I wanted to do. And for the most part, teachers and professors have always been pretty amenable to that because, the good teachers want you to just enjoy learning. So it worked well for me. And yeah, so I don't know how it came about, but it definitely was a formative sort of pattern throughout my life, throughout my early school, my late school, my early career, my late career. And even now, where I think about things not as like you walk into a university or you walk into a workplace, you don't just assume that you're going to take on all of the rules and all all the assumptions and the tricks that you need to do. Like, you have to make it your game first, and then sort of figure out what you're going to do within your own context.
I'm interested in, like, compared to maybe your peers. I know that Irvine, particularly maybe around that time, is very, like, loose, and I don't know if I'm using the right words, but like a, very adoptive place to be in the world at that time. And I'm interested to know, were your peers like that? Was that something that was just unique to you in terms of like your own perspective? Or was that
No.
something that was like part of the culture? Okay.
Yeah, no, I would classify myself as an extreme introvert, early childhood and all the way up through to probably middle of high school. Like, my nickname was Silence in school because I just didn't talk. I didn't want to talk. I was too nervous to talk to anyone. I wouldn't
Wow.
go up to the captor. I wouldn't ask if I didn't understand the assignment. I wouldn't ask the teacher. Those kinds of things. So my friends, I always was just scrambling to have friends in the first place. And by the time I did find my crew, sort of like in the middle of high school, it's cross country and track. And we didn't really bond on academics so much as lifestyle, philosophy, that kind of stuff. And I did finally really find a really close group of people that did share my values and shared my sort of approach to life. And many of those people, like a good hand, like 5+ of them are still really good friends today. So when I was 16 to where I am now, I might not have changed a whole lot. So, we're all still really close and we share some of the same stuff. So yeah, I guess in some sense, I spent many years struggling. And then when I found my people, then I sort of realized, well, I can be this kind of person. I'm not just trying to survive. I can actually just be myself. And that was really important. So that could, going back to your first question, it could sort of speak to why I'm willing to be authentic on the internet, because I felt like it was a hard lesson for me to learn to be authentic in real life with my peers, my family, with my friends. And I saw the internet as sort of an extension of that. Once I found it, there's a lot of reward to being yourself. There's a lot more to win or to gain from being yourself and projecting that outwards than there is from hiding it and forcing people to try to guess who you are.
Okay. Maybe the next question that I'd ask off the back of that, I'm really interested to know, what were your first experiences like on the internet, and what were the first places you explored? And I don't mean to ask that in a patronizing kind of sense, like when did you first discover it? But I'm really interested to know, I think there were so many internet subcultures and you were right in the heart of it, I think pretty much throughout your life. So I'm interested to know, where were the places that you explored and what were the maybe knock-on effects of that?
Yeah. Yeah. My father was into computers and, that was his job. I was very anti them for a long time, but I was around them my whole life. I played a lot of Ultima Online kind of games, sort of like these role-playing games on the computer that you put in 8 floppy disks in your computer and play them. And then when Big ESs came out, I played a few sort of networked, what was the game? Trade Wars was a big one of just buying and selling stuff. And I shared a community of people that you don't know. And I was very much into video games and stuff. So when I believe my first real, I remember I gave my first email address after I graduated college. So I was sort of late, 98, and then immediately jumped onto Diaryland, LiveJournal, and these kinds of journaling websites that were really just about posting gossip on the internet, and quickly sort of learned how to make websites from that. Because I want my blog or my website to be interesting. So I would just always be trying to innovate on that stuff. And that's what got me into ultimately web development, programming, computer science. And eventually that became my job for a while. I was immediately drawn to not necessarily the commercial aspects, but the community aspects. The year 2000 Blogger and Movable Type and Gray Matter and all these things were coming out to software you had to download to computer that would FTP files to the websites and usually break. Yeah, I was really into that. That was my introduction. And at the same time, I worked at Amazon. So it was the polar opposite of like selling stuff on the internet. And those two things sort of fused into, like, on one hand, it's like publishing, authenticity, people. On the other hand, it's like data, security, transactions, expand, just like growth, money, all that stuff. And those two forces have been like sort of battling in my life for the next 20 years until I
Yeah.
ultimately got spit out the other side. And I'm now very much back to like my original intent of like wanting to build a web that is more about bringing out the best in people than bringing out the money from people.
Yeah, you made a really good point. And I think there's two threads I'd love to pull on, and I'm not sure which to go with first. So you did a degree in creative writing. You mentioned, coming across LiveJournal and starting this, being able to write online and having that creative streak. Was that where that started, or were you already having like a tingling of writing before that?
Oh, I was a creative writing, yeah, like you said, graduate. I was working on my great American novel at the time, had a whole system with my whole identity. Like, I'm writing a novel, it's going to be, I was planning the whole thing out. I had all these notebooks. I would do a certain number of pages per week. And then I don't know, 23, 24-year-olds that are like trying to write the great American novel, you realize like there's just not enough material in your head to do that. So I ended up trying this thing called NaNoWriMo, which was, I just happened upon it. It's like this National Novel Writing Month every November, and ended up writing a couple novels that way, which I really, really enjoyed, because it was just like these brain dumps of like where I am now, or that I'm trying to like write something that's, of the caliber that's beyond my reach. So again, like finding these constraints, finding like what is the right tool to like bring out what I'm best able to do right now. I thought NaNoWriMo was a great one for that. And that sort of translated to publishing online. I love writing. I love, conversation, and putting it on the internet where you would read it seemed like this magical shift in the world. And I was all there for that.
Can I ask when you started on NaNoWriMo?
Yeah, I did the first one in 2000 and the second one in 2003. Eventually, when I
Yeah,
moved down to
because
Berkeley, I was in Seattle at the time. I happened upon someone that knew someone that worked at NaNoWriMo, like a sort of nonprofit, and it was a few blocks from my house. So I had to go meet them. And I was on the board, ended up being on the board for a while because my work with Sonapity Words and a couple other things. But I love that organization, and I think they're still amazing. Yeah. If only more of us could just put everything aside for a month and write a novel, I think it would be better. It's a big ask though.
it is a big ask. So I've tried Nano 7 times. I didn't get my 8th Pete, but 7 consecutive years, I think starting in 2012 for 8
Oh,
years.
wow.
I only
Awesome.
completed it
So you've done
2
it
years.
7 times?
I've tried it 7 times. I've completed it twice in terms of writing 50,000
Okay.
words. And then the third
Wow.
year, so I was working in corporate law at the time. Funnily enough, so, okay, and I guess maybe then from here we'll go back to your early Amazon days, because I have some questions about that. But that's one thing I found interesting, that I tried NaNoWriMo twice in the 2 years before I started working in corporate law. One of those years I was unemployed, and I could barely write more than maybe 22,000 words. I don't know what it is about having all the time in the world, but I couldn't seem to to
Mm-hmm.
use it productively. And then as
Mm-hmm.
soon as literally my first year in corporate law at one of like the biggest firms in the world, where you're doing all these hours, suddenly I write 50,000 words, and I do it the next year again. And the year after that, I almost did it. I think I got to like 30,000 words, but that month I was also averaging something like 95 hours a week. And so I shut down. I
Wow.
quit a week early, and I was like, this is too much. But the
Oh,
point
wow.
is that those 3 years consecutively, I wrote more than I had maybe even in the 2 previous years combined. Hey, we'll get back to the episode in just one moment, but I wanted to tell you very quickly about my newsletter. I started sharing everything I was learning online, and a few thousand people came along for the ride. I send 3 regular emails. Brainwave, fortnightly on a Tuesday, which is about the intersection between technology, philosophy, and psychology. Then every week on a Thursday, I send Revelations, and that's about creativity and productivity. And then finally, every other weekend, I send Wayfinder, and that's about decision making. So people in the audience actually send me really tough problems that they're working through, and I help to deconstruct them using mental models and decision making frameworks. So if you'd like to subscribe, you can join me and over 20,000 incredibly driven people at theknowledge.io. Okay, back to the episode.
Yeah, I can relate. I think I wrote both of my novels while I was at my desk at Amazon. So I think it might have been different because I was working a lot of hours, I think, but not working. Like, my heart wasn't into it as much. So I think there
Okay.
was some mix of that. There's a lot of people that are, clocking the hours, but not doing the work.
So what was it like, maybe, okay, coming into Amazon, first of all, like what was that journey of getting there? And then the second part is what were those early days like,
Mm.
both professionally in terms of what you were doing for work, but then also I know you mentioned kind of this maybe tug internally of finding the balance between like your creative pursuits and the things you actually care about, and then the job that is maybe putting food on the table.
Well, there's so much there. I was there for 5 years, from 98 to 2006. Yeah, I've worked closely with them past that. So I sort of see that as like the cauldron that my career DNA was formed. And it's not what you might expect from that statement, I guess. So early on, it was a startup. I think there were like 2,000 people when I joined. I was on customer support. So I was just answering emails and phone calls and, doing it on the night shift. So I was, doing it for people in other parts of the world. And it was scrappy. It was just like everyone was just excited about the internet. And I was there to like help people walk them through how to like use a browser. And it was great. I was really into it. I felt like the money was ridiculous because, coming right out of college, as with a bachelor's in creative writing, I did not expect, I was working at the art museum before that. I did not expect to be making, I think it was probably like $20 an hour plus overtime, which there was plenty of. And I was like, wow, I'm awash in money. What do I do? But yeah, it was so fast paced. I was working 80 hours a week, like most people back then. It was just books and music, and they launched auctions and then video and then more and more of that. And like I told you, I scrapped myself like into like someone that could write code too. So I was publishing like intranet pages and learning that on the fly. And it was fine because nobody in the world was trained as a web developer. And I just happened to be in this place where they were basically internally training everyone how to do this stuff. And I just jumped on that bandwagon and I loved it. A lot of those people are still my friends too. Like a lot of those people are like people, and some of them still work there. I saw the shift when my job stopped being like, I was on the personalization team, so doing things like similarities and shopping cart recommendations, that kind of stuff. And I just saw the pattern. I saw like, okay, the way this works is you just take what people do, you put it into the algorithm, you show them stuff that's slightly like that, and you're going to make endless money. And I just got bored with that. And I was like, I went from customer support to trainer to web developer to program manager. They had a technical product program manager to software developer. And then by that point, I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm too bored. I learned everything that I need to learn to start my own company. So I went and did that after that. The company it is now is like so different from what it was back then, but it was formative in the sense of like, I saw this open wide vista possibility. And even though they chose a path that I didn't want to take necessarily, I still see that there's that possibility there.
And so you touched on the fact that I guess during that time is you're also starting to build your own things, and you maybe built a few projects during that time. And I think you also published one of your NaNoWriMo novels during that following decade as well.
It's been enough years now to tell some of these stories. I built a text ad service for blogs. So like really medium-sized blog to be like a direct, like you could buy for $5, you could buy a text ad that go on other people's blogs if you had JavaScript. And I was running that like in some cases, like I don't know, under my desk and some at the time. And I built a thing called the idea. Like, so I was building I was learning Perl at the time, and I was learning like how this all works, and just, I loved it. A lot of it was like flashes in the pan. Like the text ads wasn't called Ad Farm. Like it blew up. It got like featured on Something Ugly, and suddenly my servers all melted, and I was like, oh shoot, I can't do this. So I had to turn it off. But many of my, like I was in this pattern of building websites, seeing if they worked, seeing if I could sustain them, seeing if I wanted to keep working on them. And then, 9 out of 10 of them don't. And then some of them did. Some of them are still around. But the last thing I'll say is that I realized sort of in year 5 or 6 that I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to just like climb the ladder. For a while that was interesting. And then I was like, instead of climbing the ladder, going back to like my turning things into games, like I wanted to be a level 1 everything. I wanted to be a level 1 marketer, level 1 designer, level 1 software developer, level 1 project manager, level 1 manager. And I actually told my boss this at the time, and he was sort of like, okay, we can't do that officially because there's no career thing that says that, but like unofficially, that's your job. And if you want to like go embed yourself on this team and learn marketing, you can do that for a month, and you can do it. So I was like, I love that because that was a big gift for me to first like realize that's what I wanted, and then to be in a place that was so perfect for learning all these different skills, and to have a manager that was willing to sort of entertain it, and then to be paid a lot of money on top of that. It was great. So I have no ill will to the whole thing. And to this day, I still I think of myself as a generalist. Whenever I need a job, I will like narrow that down into something that can get a job, because people don't like to hire generalists. But that's how I see myself, with just someone that's interested in how the things connect, and not. I mean, I like the details too, but I tend to hop from vertical to vertical to like understand them better.
No, I love that. And I absolutely agree. I think, funnily enough, that is almost word for word something that I talk about on the course that I run, but just also in general, maybe like on Twitter and spaces, is this idea of, first of all, I love the idea of being a generalist because I think that fits me very well. Similarly, I don't know if I've necessarily had the opportunity to have a boss that says, you can just go run around and learn whatever you need to learn. But I think I've been able to build that in a way, like throughout my career as well. Like I started very early on. So I taught myself like some design, and I used that design to get into marketing, and I did some like very early marketing. But I think, okay, long time, this is like the immigrant mindset. I wanted to go into like some kind of profession. So I was like, okay, I'm going to be a lawyer. That's what I'm going to do, but I'm going to like pursue all these other things on the side. So I'm still doing like some marketing jobs and still doing some design. I'm building websites, doing all these random things on the side. And then I think I started consulting for startups. Maybe I launched one or two things of my own. I also like previously built a business. And so I think as you go on, you're like accumulating information through your role. I think you maybe get some know-how from what you're doing, and particularly for you, I mean, having the customer success element, having some marketing element, having product management, and then building all the projects, you're getting all of the tools and the skill set, and then being able to experiment wildly and sow some seeds and see what grows.
I think it's a very privileged sort of path that I've taken, but there's downsides as well, I think. But the upsides are really just being able to follow curiosity, to follow, like when you run into a problem, like not having to find a person that can solve your problem, but having the tools to figure out the problem, that you don't have to in a different domain, I think is really valuable in a lot of ways, because life is sort of chaotic and we end up needing to, so it's so much faster to find an answer than to find somebody with an answer sometimes. But that could be also my introvert side speaking a little bit too.
Yeah. With those early projects, was it more like, what was the motivation? Were you just following your curiosity and just like, pruning some different fields and seeing what stuck? Or were you actually trying to find one key thing? Like there's something you wanted to knock out of the park and you were just testing lots of different things to see what really struck gold?
I think while I was at Amazon, I was really trying to find a way out of Amazon. So I wanted to start a company. I was experimenting with a lot of different ways because the internet was still, extremely new. The tools were still barely working, but I was at the frontier of that, and I could sort of be the first person to make the connection. So my first startup was about it was called 43 Things, and it was about making a list of goals and then using the internet to help people find people that have accomplished their goals you want to do and getting tips from them. And it was a pure blank slate blogging play. Like instead of just writing on a blog, write about your goals and organize everything around what people want to do. And it turned out to be a really good way to target SEO at the time, because most Google searches are about goals. And so we ranked really highly and ended up making a successful business out of it, but then got required by Amazon. So that was the other 3 years of that. Yeah. So, but then after that, I think there was a point when I turned 27 and I always think of 27 because in astrology, even though I'm not really an astrology person, like it's like the Saturn returns. Like it was the year that like me and my favorite musicians killed themselves or died. It's like this year of reconfiguration. And I remember like that year, everything was falling apart. I hated my job. I hated my life. I didn't like myself. And so I, ended up, I was married. I got divorced. I quit my job. I shaved my head. I sold all my possessions. I left my house, and I made this plan of like 1,000 days to like reinvent myself. And 1,000 days. Yeah. This could be a long story, so cut me off. But yeah, it was like this moment of death and rebirth, right? Of like, okay, I saw that path. I saw where it was going. I didn't want to be that person. I'm going to kill that guy and I'm going to start over. And I actually ended up changing my name, like all 3 of my names, first, middle, and last, on a whim, to names that, were voted on and coin flipped. So at that point, that's sort of at the ended up phase was when I realized like my question was, how do we change ourselves? Can we change ourselves? And if we can, how do we do it? Like, is it even possible? Because I was thinking about a lot of these different things, like technology is being used to persuade people, recommend things. Like the internet is being used to form communities and change behaviors and habits. And I got deep into like quantified self and all that stuff. And then at the same time had this sliver of like doubt of like, is this all working or is it not working? Is this all just a racket to like sell things? And, so I tried many ways to change myself. Like, I did a month where I was like, I'm going to gain 10 pounds this month. And the next month I'm going to lose 10 pounds, things like that, where it's like not change for a purpose so much as change for change itself, to understand like, what are the levers I need to twist? And to understand like, what are is any of the habit science legit? So that's when like Habit Labs and Health Month and Locavore and 750 Words even, and so many other websites that have come and gone came from. It's like this sort of pursuit of using technology, using the web, using social media, I guess, as a way to like, can accountability help us change? Can various sort of placebo effects help us change? Can social unity help us change? And trying to find the answers to those questions. Yeah, that carried me from like for like another 10 years, I think. I think there's always like this central question. And then eventually that changed to something that's more about like, who should I be? Like, how do I exist in the world without harming things? Because it's not about fixing biases, or it's about like repairing. I don't know. So I'm sort of in the middle of this question right now. Like, how do we add something valuable back to the world without hurting it in the process? Like, I came away from the tech world, my last tech job in 2018, I think. I don't know if I'll go back, because like all this time I've had these ideals going through, working at Amazon, Twitter, Slack, Patreon, each time having the best intentions, and each time coming away feeling like, am I making the world worse? Like, especially Twitter, like I made the world worse. I had good intentions, but like I made it worse. That fear now of like, it's not about can I change myself or how do I change it? Like, who's to say that I should change? Like, who's to say that the change I do won't make things worse for the people? And so now I think a lot about like self-reflection and thinking about like, what are the big ways we could participate in the world while accepting it the way it is and contributing in a way that you don't end up regretting. So yeah, long answer. And there's a lot more detail in there, but hey, hopefully that's the gist.
Yeah, no, there's so much in there. I'd love to maybe just digging in on that last part and thinking about your experiences, maybe at companies like Twitter, Slack, like all of those companies are, in my mind, ones that have huge promise. And maybe that's kind of what you went in with, is this idea that these are things that can change the world in some ways, whether that's positive or negative, but also change the way that we communicate, the way that we interact with each other. All of them in very different ways. Obviously, like Slack is maybe more generally geared towards organizations. Twitter is, I think, in some ways democratizing speech and having this like short blog format, or I can't remember what the original words were, but like a mini blog,
microblogging,
where you can say, yeah, just like a few words and sprinkle them out. But I think it's, and again, I'll get to your experiences, but I do see that conflict, at least in my own life, where I can see on one hand the destruction that can happen when misinformation spreads and false ideas spread, or not necessarily false, but maybe quite potent ideas spread. And through algorithms, people can be dug into trenches that they can't see out of, because everything that they see simply reinforces what they are already inclined to believe. And then that can also go into like maybe things like beauty and fashion and health. And there's more and more we are kind of being groomed into identities that are almost built for us, if that makes sense. Like that there is that perspective. But then on the other side, I also definitely see, so I came to the UK from Nigeria, and I see this huge tech scene that's now booming in Nigeria and across Africa. And I see people in Kenya, people that are getting access to the internet. And I think maybe this is also the difference, where in the US or even in the UK, the first computers were the first computers. And that is how people started with computers, is like these really old, like the Macintosh or whatever, Atari computer. But in Africa and maybe India and places now, like people's first computer is a mobile phone. And so they are jumping in right into that kind of like last third of all of this history of development. And people are jumping in right here. And their first interaction with the internet is getting straight into Facebook and straight into Twitter and straight into some of these other things. And obviously, okay, there are negatives, and we see like these viral threads where loads of information spreads and it's rampant. But then simultaneously, it's like people being able to have a voice, and people that this is the only device that they have, and this is the only internet they have, and they are on Twitter, and they can see everything that we see and interact with everything that we interact with. So I think it's an interesting duality there, where there's this magic, and then there's also the capability for maybe destruction.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly don't think anything can be just labeled as evil. It's really just like the line between good and evil goes through every single heart, goes through every single product, goes through every single service out there. And we can sort of be lured in. I mean, I think there are ways to use it to sort of push people in that direction of evil or good. But yeah, ultimately you can't just cut anything off entirely. Like, I feel pretty strongly about that. Even if it was possible, which it's not, I think we have to still deal with the fact that we're part of the problem and we're part of the solution. And like, same goes for everybody else.
And I think that leads right into Why Are We Yelling? Which is the book that you wrote. And I think that was published right around the time that you left your last tech job.
Yeah. I left my last job at Patreon to finish this book. So yeah, I think,
Okay.
It was published in 2019.
Okay, maybe let's just start with, where did the book come from? Like, what was the inspiration? I know some of it I could possibly guess, but
Yeah.
from your perspective, like, where did that come from?
Yeah, it actually started with a viral Medium post. So when my second son was born, I took a month or 6 weeks off, and like to keep my mind from rotting, I think I dove into this cognitive biases Wikipedia page because it had been bothering me for a decade of like, I don't understand biases. I don't understand why they exist. How are we finding them? Are they real? Like, how are they structured? Why do we have them? How do you fix them? All that stuff. And I could also just couldn't remember them. I couldn't remember like all the different ways. And so I thought I would just like immerse myself in the data, which I love to do. The beginning of any problem, just like bring on everything, just piled on, and then feel like the overwhelm of that and let your brain sort of like digest it and try to make sense of it. And after doing this for like a month, I came out with like this post, which is called the Cognitive Bias Cheat Sheet. And it was like 17-minute read. It was called Cognitive Bias Cheat Sheet. It wasn't made to be clickbait at all. Like, it was like the most boring post. But for some reason, I think because it promised like this gem of like synthesizing a really complicated topic, it blew up, and it's like one of the top 100 Medium posts, I think. And that was really interesting for a lot of reasons. One of them being, I don't know, I wasn't used to like my post doing that. Second of all, is like, I didn't understand why it was happening. And third of all, is like, book editors started emailing me like, you want to write a book? Here's a deal. And so I pushed them away a bit because I had a newborn kid and I was working and books are hard. But eventually sort of found an editor that seemed to like understand how I wanted to go about writing a book, which was not necessarily to sell any books. My goal was to be proud of writing a book. If it was going to take 2 years or 10 years, like, I was going to take my time. And they're being a great editor, like, accepted that and also like helped me like form it into something that was actually a real book, and ultimately did sell pretty well. But it started about being about cognitive biases. The title was Thinking is Hard, which is like the subtitle of the blog post. And I was like, who cares? Like, of course, thinking is hard. There's already plenty of books about that. Why is thinking hard? And when is thinking hard? And I sort of settled on arguments, disagreements as the venue, like the arena where all of our biases were meant to be used, right? It's where they go from like being sort of in the background to being like front and center. This is what we're doing, kind of modules in your brain. And so what do they do for us? They help us in a lot of ways win arguments, even if we're not right. They do this by like filtering information that's not convenient to winning. They help us jump to conclusions when more data might confuse us. You know, they help us sort of make sense of data points that don't quite connect, but connect them all into a coherent narrative. They help us like make generalizations. They help us sort of remember the right things to like use later. So it made sense in that context. And it also seemed like a novel book. It seemed like this is useful for me as a generalist. Like, arguing is something that everyone does. We can all relate to this. And it's something that for some reason isn't talked about a lot. Like, no one's an expert arguer. Like, there's expert debaters, there's expert salespeople, but there's no expert moderators really out there. And maybe diplomats in theory are, but really they're just fighting for their team still. There's no one that's truly out there trying to connect, build bridges, see common, and to bring us back into a coherent, like cohesive community instead of dividing us. And so that was like, if I wrote that book, I would feel proud about it. So I did, and it took, it was difficult, but that was the genesis of it. And yeah, I still feel very proud about the book because it isn't what I could not have written that without the book. Like, I couldn't have written that as a series of blog posts. I couldn't have written it on my own. It needed the crucible of being on a book deal with a publisher and a really great agent and a really good editor, and like having this really compressed anxiety around the election and everything that was just like contributing to it that made it happen. And, I look back on it saying both like, that sucked, that was the most difficult time of my life, but also like, at least something nice came out of it, something useful.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Please do stay tuned for more. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps the podcast. And follow me on Twitter. Feel free to shoot me any thoughts. See you next time.